Another key element of any clinical trial is the inclusion and exclusion criteria as well. And setting that inclusion exclusion criteria really defines the target patient populations that are going to be screening eligible for that particular study. And as you can imagine, there's so many factors to consider in terms of setting the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And invariably it's extremely important to understand what the downstream ramifications in terms of the available patients and the patient characteristics might be of a given set of inclusion exclusion criteria. And this is one area where really being able to understand and interrogate the patient journeys at scale across a population can really begin to inform that and position clinical scientists to make a better decision in light of what the downstream ramifications of one particular set of inclusion exclusion criteria might be. And it's pretty compelling to be able to do this with a sense of understanding potentially disproportionate impact to different racial and ethnic groups based upon different inclusion exclusion criteria that are being considered. And in some cases, that may not ultimately result in a clinical scientist choosing not to use a particular inclusion exclusion criteria, because that might be required relative to the mechanism of action and the specific therapeutic area they're going after. But even the knowledge of knowing that that particular inclusion exclusion criteria set may disproportionately impact a particular race or ethnic group can begin to inform the strategy of how to think about executing that trial and operationalizing that trial, and what specific levers they might want to consider to mitigate that once that trial gets into the recruitment phase. You can see comparing different sets of inclusion exclusion criteria across different other demographics across the patient. But then also, more importantly, you can interrogate the patient journey to understand relative rates of different diagnoses that could be associated comorbidities of interest, and really being able to surface and say, if I was to scenario model one set of inclusion exclusion criteria versus another and easily compare different diagnosis rates of specific comorbidities, that can begin to better characterize the target patient populations and really begin to inform how we might mitigate any risks associated with designing that trial and or executing that trial.